The wind whispered through the cracked windows of the mansion, its skeletal frame standing ominously against the moonlit sky. Detective Laura Davis pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders, the cold night air biting through the thin fabric. Beside her, Detective Mark Henderson adjusted his flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness that seemed to swallow everything around them. "This is it," Mark said, his voice barely more than a whisper. The mansion loomed over them, a silent testament to decades of neglect and forgotten horrors. The old Linton place. "Ready?" Laura nodded, though the chill running down her spine was more than just the cold. The mansion had a reputation, a dark history marked by the gruesome murders committed by its last resident, Vincent Gray. They said his ghost still haunted the place, but Laura didn't believe in ghosts. Not until tonight, anyway. The detectives pushed open the heavy oak door, its hinges groaning in protest. The air inside was stale, thick with dust and the faint metallic scent of blood. Their footsteps echoed through the grand foyer, where faded portraits watched them with hollow eyes. "Let's split up," Mark suggested. "We'll cover more ground that way." Laura hesitated but nodded. "All right, call out if you find anything." She watched as Mark disappeared down the hallway, his footsteps fading into the oppressive silence. Taking a deep breath, Laura turned and made her way towards the stairs, each creak under her feet, a reminder of the mansion's age and decay. The second floor was even darker, the shadows deeper and more menacing. Laura's flashlight flickered as she moved from room to room, each one more decrepit than the last. She found herself in what must have been a bedroom, the remnants of a once luxurious life now reduced to cobwebs and rot. Suddenly, a cold breeze brushed against her neck, and she spun around, her heart racing. The room was empty, but the air felt charged, as if something unseen was watching her. "Mark," she called out, her voice trembling slightly. "Is that you?" Silence answered her, thick and suffocating. She turned back to the room, her flashlight catching a glimpse of something on the wall. She moved closer, her breath catching in her throat as she saw the crude, bloody handprints smeared across the wallpaper. "Jesus," she muttered, stepping back. The air grew colder still, and she felt a presence behind her. Slowly she turned, and for a fleeting moment, she saw him, a shadowy figure, his eyes burning with malice. Laura's scream echoed through the mansion as the figure lunged at her. She stumbled back, her flashlight clattering to the floor and plunging her into darkness. She scrambled for her radio, her fingers shaking. Mark, come in. I need help." The radio crackled with static, but there was no response. Panic surged through her as she fumbled in the dark, her eyes wide and straining to see. The presence was still there. She could feel it, oppressive and malevolent. She stumbled out of the room, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The hallway seemed longer now, stretching endlessly in either direction. Laura forced herself to move, her legs trembling as she hurried towards the stairs. But as she reached the top, she froze. The figure was there, waiting for her. "Get away!" she screamed, but her voice was swallowed by the darkness. The figure advanced, and she turned to flee, only to find herself in another room, its walls covered in more bloody handprints. Desperation clawed at her as she realized she was trapped. The figure was everywhere, a specter of death and madness. Her thoughts raced to Mark. She had to find him, had to get out of this nightmare. "Mark," she called again, her voice breaking. "Please, where are you?" She burst into another room, her heart leaping as she saw Mark's flashlight on the floor, but Mark was nowhere to be seen. She grabbed the flashlight, her hands shaking as she scanned the room. "Laura," a voice whispered, sending chills down her spine. She turned slowly, and there he was, Vincent Gray, his face twisted in a grotesque grin. "Welcome home," he hissed, and the world around her went black. Laura awoke to the sound of footsteps, her head throbbing. She was in the foyer, the portraits glaring down at her. She struggled to sit up, her eyes widening as she saw Mark standing over her, his face pale and eyes vacant. "Mark," she whispered, but he didn't respond. He reached down, helping her to her feet. His touch was ice cold. "We need to leave," he said, his voice hollow. "Now." She nodded, too dazed to argue. They made their way to the door, but as they reached it, Mark stopped. Laura turned to him, her heart sinking as she saw the expression on his face. "Mark, what's wrong?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with terror. "I can't leave," he whispered. "He won't let me." Before she could react, the door slammed shut, and the room plunged into darkness. Laura screamed, the sound piercing the silence as the ghost of Vincent Gray closed in around them. In the darkness, Laura realized the truth. They were never going to leave this place. The mansion had claimed them, just as it had claimed so many others before, and Vincent Gray's ghost would never let them go. As the shadows swallowed them, Laura's final scream echoed through the empty halls, a chilling reminder of the horrors that lurked within the walls of the Linton mansion.